Number 1. This happened some time ago, but nothing even close has happened since, and it took me a long time to realize the gravity of the situation. I lived in a share house with 3 other guys at the time. They were all at their various jobs, and I worked night shifts at a nearby gas station. I was in bed after a shift, fast asleep, when I was startled awake, not really knowing why. There was a period of about 15 to 20 seconds after I began to wake up, of silence, followed by a knock at the door. At this point, having just woken up, I was still trying to get my bearings. I must have just been woken up by the knock. Another 15 to 20 seconds pass in silence, and I start to think maybe it was just a door-to-door salesman, charity collections, or something like that, and figure they must have just left. So I start to relax a little at this point, when the entire front of the house starts to shake, and I can hear what sounds like someone hitting the front wall with a sledgehammer. At this point, I can't really process what's going on. My first thoughts are, since we lived across from a train station, this must be because of activity at the station. Maybe a freight train grumbling past. I don't know why I thought that, but in my mind it was the most logical thing. All of a sudden, the banging stops, momentarily. It resumes another 5 seconds later. By this time, less than 2 minutes had passed since I woke up. It felt like my brain had only just started working. I realize now that, at the very least, something was happening to the front of the house. Something that I didn't like. The bangs were very loud, and the house was pretty old and warped, almost entirely made out of wood. I started to panic, because I could feel the shaking frame starting to give under the blows. So I did the only thing I could think of, and started yelling and screaming unsteadily at the front of the house. From memory, I think I frantically yelled something like, "What the hell are you doing?" It was a fight or flight response. I didn't even have time to think, to formulate a plan, or go out the back door, or call the police. Almost as suddenly as it started, the banging stopped. And then I heard footsteps outside, running away. For some reason, this gave me confidence, and I looked around for a weapon to grab before I went outside to confront whoever this was. Which was really stupid, I now realize. I remember thinking the handle felt a little weird when I opened the front door. However, by the time I got outside, they were gone. Nowhere to be seen. Almost as if they'd never been there at all. I should mention that I was getting about 2 hours of sleep a day before my graveyard shifts. So I was a little sleep deprived, and I knew I wasn't really thinking clearly. So I started to question whether anything had happened at all. Then when I went outside, I looked for any signs of damage to verify for sure whether this had really happened or not. Then I saw the front door and realized why the handle had felt odd. The flimsy wooden door had been struck next to the handle repeatedly and started to splinter. If they'd kicked the center of the door, I'm sure their foot would have gone right through. But they were kicking right next to the handle, closer to the frame where it was slightly stronger. Who's to say if it wouldn't have been 1 or 2 more kicks, and they would have been inside? The police showed up later and I filed a report. Although nothing was stolen, and there was nothing even taken from the unlocked garage beneath the bedrooms. They were either too stupid to check the downstairs first, or they weren't here to steal anything. But they were here for something else. Number 2. In the early 1990s, which would have made me about 10 or 12 years of age at the time, I had the scare of my life. I lived in rural Missouri, and the closest neighbors were miles away. We lived right next to my grandparents on 200 acres of land, 10 miles from any city in all directions. My mother worked nights, and my father wasn't in the picture, and my grandparents had just left for vacation to North Carolina. My sister was super young, so my mother arranged for her to stay at her friend's house for the week. And I had somehow talked my mother into letting me stay home alone from 3 p.m. to around 12 a.m. till she got home from work. Monday came around, and it was time for Mother to leave for work, so she called me in and gave me all the rules and the keys to my grandparents' house, just in case of an emergency. We didn't have a phone, so I'd have to go to their house to use their phone if there was an emergency. She wrote down her work number for me, along with the number to call the police, which was kind of irritating to me, given the fact that my mom expected me not to know how to dial 911. I spent all day playing video games and listening to music, too loud for my family's liking. But I finally got my first taste of freedom, and I was going to enjoy it like any other preteen would. Everything was fine till around dusk, when I started hearing noises. But I didn't really think much about it because when you live in the country, so secluded, every noise you hear is 100 times louder, given how quiet it is around you. I turned off my music sometime around 9 or 10 and sat down to watch a movie. And in an odd turn of coincidence, the movie I decided to watch just so happened to be Home Alone. About halfway through the movie, I started hearing banging, which I thought was coming from underneath the house because we had a lot of cats that hung around the outside of the house. Some were wild, and sometimes they would fight and make loud thud sounds. I paused the movie and went to look outside to see if I could see anything. But I couldn't make out anything, so I started to head back to my room when I thought I heard the back doorknob turning. So I turned back around and headed to the back of the house, which faced a bunch of trees and open land as far as you could see. About the time I reached the back of the house, I could have sworn I'd seen the doorknob moving. But I knew Mom wasn't due home for about another 2 hours. So thinking nothing of it, I went back into my room and started the movie back up. But I still heard those thuds and bumps and what I thought was the doorknob turning. But I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me and blew it off. And before I knew it, my mom was home. She asked me how my day was. I remember thinking that if you want to stay home alone again, you better say everything was good, besides the cats fighting and banging into everything. To which she said, "You kids and your cats." And we both headed to bed. The next day, I couldn't get it out of my head that I'd seen the doorknob moving and should probably tell my mom. But I talked myself into staying quiet, and my mom left for work, not knowing what was about to happen. At about sundown, I got the smart idea, most likely from the Home Alone movie, to put something on the back porch so I could see if anyone had been standing on it. I grabbed a brand new bag of flour and dumped the entire thing all over the place and went back into the house and double locked the door. I went into my room and started jamming out and playing video games for the next few hours. And before I knew it, it was pitch black outside again. I turned the music off and started to read a Goosebumps book when it started again, the thuds and bangs. And I was thinking it was those stupid cats again. Until I heard the sound that scared the crap out of me and still makes the hair on my arms stand up even as I write this. The back door was violently being pulled and pushed, which sounded like someone trying to knock down the wall. So like a dumb kid, I head to the back of the house and see the doorknob turning, for sure this time. I reached for the doorknob to make sure it was locked, and when I looked up, there was something in all black. That's all I saw. I was scared. It looked right at me. I didn't see a face since whoever it was had a hoodie on, and they scared me so bad that I screamed that I had a gun and knew how to use it. In response, I heard another thud. I figured this person doesn't even care that I said I had a gun and was still planning on breaking in. I listened for what seemed like a lifetime to this guy struggling to break in. I went back to the door, and whoever it was helped himself to one of our deck chairs as if he was tired. As soon as they saw me, they started banging and kicking the back door again. And that's when I thought I have to make it to my grandparents' house and call my mom. I went back to my room and grabbed the keys and phone numbers, and then headed for the back door to see if they were still there. They were, and every time they saw me, it was as if they went into a fit of rage. I finally went to the front door, which they didn't have sight of, and timed the thud to the door. Thud. 1, 2, 3. Wait. Thud. 1, 2, 3. I told myself I was going to go as soon as the next repetition hit. I've always been a really fast runner, and when I made it to high school, I went to state in multi-sprint events. So I knew I had this covered. Thud. I opened the door, jumped the 4 steps off the deck, and was off like a bullet. I don't even think my older self ran as fast as I did that night to my grandparents' house, which was about a city block away. When I hit their porch, I heard keys coming towards me, as if they were in someone's pocket. I reached the door and shoved the key into the slot. Bingo. I'm in. I closed the door and locked it, and then realized how lucky I was that they hadn't locked the deadbolt. I locked it behind me. About the time the deadbolt locked, I heard steps on their deck and banging on the door. I picked up the phone and dialed my mom's work, which was unsuccessful when I realized that she'd forgotten to write down the extension number, and there was nobody at the front office at this time. Now, this is the part where I made a mistake. But I was a kid and scared. I called my best friend, and his mom picked up. Hey, yeah, it's Brian. Brian, do you know what time it is? Yes, I'm sorry, but someone is breaking into my house, and they ran after me to my grandparents' house, I said. I'll be there in 10. Hide. I'm calling the cops, she said in response. Now mind you, my tiny town of 917 doesn't have a 24-hour cop on duty, so the closest one away was probably 20 miles. I hid for what seemed like hours, and my best friend's mom and dad made record-breaking time from their house to ours, which I tried to do in my Mustang and couldn't. They did it in a farm truck. My friend's dad was yelling, "Brian, it's us, let us in," and I unlocked the door. His mom grabbed me as soon as she saw I was crying and tried to calm me while my friend's dad went to go find this person and presumably fight them off. Needless to say, he didn't. About 10 minutes later, the police showed up, followed by my mom. The cops told my mom that they'd found tracks in the flower I put on the porch, which I got into trouble for since she said if I knew I'd seen something, I should have said something. I should have told somebody, and not tried to reenact a stupid movie. 3 or 4 cops showed up and worked the case. They eventually found a car parked about a quarter of a mile down the road, through the forest of our backyard. They found the waist-high grass knocked over and a pile of smoked cigarettes on the tree line. And the scariest part is that as they walked the path, whoever it was made through the high grass, they found a hunting knife, which my mother didn't even tell me about till I was much older. To my knowledge, no one was ever caught. and I never stayed home alone again until I was almost 18, and we had a phone. I often dream of this night and wonder what ifs. What if I was a really slow runner? What if there were two of them, and I'd only seen one, and the other had gotten me? This event still scares me today, and I'm 37, and I have a 10-year-old boy who wants to stay home alone. That is not going to happen. Number 3. I now feel paranoid when staying at my dad's house alone. My parents had just recently divorced, and I was staying at my dad's house because his house is in the same area as my school. It was late at night and my dad was at work, around 9 or 10 p.m. On any normal night, I would be asleep around this time, but I had to get up at 5 a.m. the next morning to get ready for school, so I was awake. I've heard many horror stories about how situations like this can turn out, so needless to say, I was a bit paranoid. I was laying down on the couch, watching TV, when I heard 2 dogs barking and growling. I mute the TV and go over my phone to text my dad, since the dogs don't typically bark. He tells me he's on his way home and will be there soon anyways. I'm freaking out because the dogs are still barking severely. I grab a knife and put my ear to the front door to see if I could hear anything better. Everything was silent except for the dogs. And I hear my dad's truck pull into the driveway. He gets out of the truck and comes inside. He has a worried look on his face as he tells me that our phone cables have been cut. Why would someone do that? My dad immediately went back outside with his rifle in hand and fires a warning shot into the yard. Since then, nothing has happened. I suppose I should feel lucky. Whoever it was, I can imagine that their plans went far beyond just cutting the phone line. A part of me worries that maybe they'd done that so that I couldn't call the police. Maybe they planned on breaking in or attacking me. I should consider myself lucky.